As we come together to renew ourselves this Rosh Hashanah, our tradition gives us opportunities to explore themes that are essential to starting off the year fresh, with hope, with optimism, and with inspiration. Another theme is creation and creativity. Earlier this evening, our attention was on the Torah's vision of Rosh Hashanah as Yom Teruah, connected to the shofar blast and the revelation of God's presence. But over 1,000 years later, the rabbis introduced the idea that this holy day is the celebration of the creation of the human being. This day of Rosh Hashanah tunes us into the experience of ourselves as human beings as part of the creative process. And the process of creation begins with thought. In fact, we will chant many times in our liturgy tomorrow, Hayom Harat Olam, today, which means today the world is conceived. More specific, harat, more specific than born, conceived is a word that connotes thought. And when we refer to God's thought in creating the human being, we are referring to the ultimate expression of diversity. The rabbis teach in the Mishnah, an individual person was created to show the greatness of God. While a person stamps many coins from a single cast, they are all alike. But God stamped every person with the cast of the first human, and yet not one of them are alike. Of course, all of us are created unique. But that also means that our thinking processes are unique. Just as we share the same flesh and blood and the same godly imprint, we are also diverse and unique in our DNA, in our fingerprints, and in the design of our neural pathways. Because of these incredible differences, especially neurologically, our human species has been able to evolve and create so much. However, every culture and society also develops differently, and some, including ours, is not structured to handle the neurodiversity that makes up our family, community, and society. On a simplistic level, individuals who have a relatively easy time functioning in our world and meeting social expectations are called neurotypical. And those for whom it's more challenging are called neurodiverse. Or as Aviv likes to remind me, neurodivergent. Neuroscientific research has been able to affirm and challenge theories about differences in human aptitudes, arriving at this concept of neurodiversity, and understanding that our neural behaviors encompass a broader range of performance than would typically be seen as normal. And examples of neurodivergence include those who have a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, but can also include people who have tested as profoundly gifted. Neurodivergent brains perceive and operate differently, sometimes revolutionizing prevailing norms. One only needs to consider game-changing scientists, artists, and inventors like Galileo, Mozart, and Tesla, each of whom demonstrated neurodivergent traits. It's notable that Steve Jobs was dyslexic and that Greta Thunberg is on the autistic spectrum. Neurodiversity as a concept reframes our perceptions of those whose brain function operates differently by including them within the spectrum of creative cognition rather than treating them as having a form of disability. Unfortunately, the lack of awareness and understanding about neurodiversity causes people whose brains who work differently from the norm to be marginalized in our society. Frequently, the traits that inconvenience or make neurotypical people uncomfortable are the same traits that not only define neurodivergent people, but also give them unique gifts and keep them safe. For example, neurotypicals might view a person as socially awkward, where they could be seen as authentic and unique. A person perceived as too sensitive could also be seen as perceptive or emotionally attuned or compassionate. A person perceived as annoying and loud could also be viewed as enthusiastic, alive, and outspoken. We might consider that our negative view of another who presents themselves differently is more due to social systems and norms that find many of these neurodivergent qualities inconvenient. One of the ways that neurodiversity presents is through autism. Typical autism is visible from an early age and is noticeable in children because they don't communicate the way that neurotypical society expects them to. They might be nonverbal or slow to develop speech. They might avoid gazing at other people or approaching them. They might engage in repetitive behaviors that are recognizable, like rocking in place or slapping themselves in the head or yelling and chirping. Their sensory pain and sensory overwhelm, social overwhelm, is near constant, and they can't hide how profoundly they suffer. However, the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of, what does it stand for?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of
Mental Disorder, thank you. That has relabeled autism to autism spectrum disorder to communicate the idea that this particular neurodiversity is expressed in a spectrum. And the spectrum is really about how each individual is able to function within societal expectations and norms. As a side, I'm in support of those advocating for the term autism spectrum condition to remove the pathological implications. In the media, almost every autistic character is a white man with a monotone voice, rude demeanor, and a penchant for science. Right? Think of the irascible genius Rick from Rick and Morty, or the hyper-competent yet cold Sean Murphy from ABC's Good Doctor, or the nerdy and condescending Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. In this cultural landscape, there's little room for autistics who are sensitive, emotionally expressive, artistic, or uninterested in academic success. And autism isn't always as visually obvious as using a wheelchair, but research shows that there are many subtle markers of this difference that neurotypical people do pick up on, though not always consciously. One study found that neurotypical people quickly and subconsciously identify a stranger as autistic, often within milliseconds of meeting them. They don't realize that they've identified the person as autistic. They're just not sure how to connect. Participants in the study were less interested in engaging in conversation with autistic people and liked them less than non-autistics, all based on just a brief moment of social data. It's also important to point out that the autistic people in the study didn't do anything wrong in their behavior. Their behavior was perfectly socially appropriate, as was the content of their speech. Though they tried to present as neurotypical, their performance had some key tells seeming just slightly off to neurotypicals, and they were disliked because of it. There's great evidence in Jewish tradition that some of our greatest figures are neurodiverse. In the book, Was Joseph on the Spectrum? Orthodox Rabbi Samuel Levine argues that the way our ancestor Joseph is portrayed in the book of Genesis and the myriad rabbinic commentaries that expound on the text all point to an individual who has major characteristics of someone on the autistic spectrum. For example, Joseph is focused intently on his own perceptions and the perspectives of people and the world around him, relatively, if not largely, oblivious to the way that others see him. While it seems obvious that tattling on his brother's misdeeds will only breed further animosity on their part, Joseph is absorbed in his own world and acts without taking into account how his actions will be perceived and the feelings they'll engender. In either event, Joseph's determination to tell his father of his brother's wrongdoing, notwithstanding the negative ramifications for his own well-being, may exemplify another aspect of Joseph's character, common for an individual on the spectrum. Joseph has a close connection to truth and a powerful commitment to morality, leading to a compulsion to express his views, often in stark terms, regardless of other considerations. Thus, like many on the spectrum, in scenarios that call for diplomacy or discretion, Joseph bluntly speaks the truth as he sees it, even to his own detriment. Though his brothers have engaged in wrongful activities, there doesn't seem to be an urgent need to immediately inform Jacob particularly. Like many on the spectrum, Joseph sees the world in black and white, unable to appreciate or tolerate nuance, both in his approach to morality and in the way he responds and interacts with those around him. Joseph perceives and characterizes any deviation from the truth as a manifestation of wrongdoing, and he feels compelled to share his perceptions of truth with others in extreme and categorical terms. If the brothers did not, in fact, commit these sins, they likely found Joseph's accusations both inexplicable and infuriating. Just as Joseph is unable to understand how his actions are perceived by others, his brothers are unable to understand Joseph, finding him puzzling, annoying, and possibly even threatening. In the Talmud, the great rabbinic sage Abaye is known for the way that he and his students may jump from one topic to the next, seemingly going off on tangents until he ties them all together full circle at the end of a large passage or sugya. Rabbi Eli Fisher suggests that unlike his rabbinic partner Rava, Abaye demonstrates a mind that can be characterized by ADHD, attention deficit with hyperactivity disorder. And his observation is that if Abaye and others with this neurodiverse expression had difficulty staying on one topic, if they were forced to get with the program, we would not be exposed to his rabbinic genius, and our tradition would be less rich because of it. If we're able to better understand the myriad facets of neurodiversity and are committed to making space in our family, our synagogue community, and our societies for individuals to thrive, then we need to take a good look at our concept of disability and how we view others through that lens. Where the medical model of disability fails is in making sense of disabilities that come from social exclusion or oppression. Sometimes what society and the psychiatric establishment considers to be an individual defect is in fact a perfectly benign difference that needs accommodation and acceptance. Enter the social model of disability, originally coined in 1980s by Mike Oliver. In his writing, Oliver describes disability as a political status, one that's created by the systems that surround us, not our minds and bodies. A clear-cut example of this is how most educational institutions exclude deaf students. And yet, in a completely deaf school, it's the hearing person who couldn't read sign language that would be the one who is disabled. The social model of disability applies to many of the struggles that neurodivergent people experience. Many people have been repeatedly overlooked and excluded because society views their difference as shameful defects rather than basic human realities. Often these people who experience the world differently are disabled for completely arbitrary reasons, just like deaf people are. A world where everyone uses sign language is possible, but because hearing people have greater numbers and more social power than deaf people do, spoken language gets prioritized. Similarly, a world where eye contact is not required is entirely possible. And in fact, there are many cultures in which eye contact is considered not polite. However, in cultures where eye contact is expected, many autistic people who find it painful are disabled both socially and professionally. And it isn't just autistics who are penalized by this norm. People who find eye contact difficult because of social anxiety or trauma or because their home culture discourages it are also ostracized. Having a social disability goes hand in hand with the obligation to mask. In this context, the term mask is used to describe the effort to hide one's feelings or experience it so they will be acceptable to others. If a person struggles at work because they can't play by elaborate, unstated social rules, they risk being socially disabled and severely punished for their failure to mask correctly. At present, the autistic or neurodiverse people who have the greatest freedom to unmask are the ones who have the most powerful social position. Devin Price, an autistic social psychologist and PhD professor, has the freedom to set his own schedule, can dress in a comfortable and quirky way that doesn't give him sensory overwhelm. He can block out time alone on his calendar when he feels a meltdown coming on. But he shares how his friends that work in grocery stores, restaurants, and daycare centers have to plaster a smile on their faces and swallow their pain when an environment challenges them in order to stay employed. If you consider yourself neurodiverse in any way, my hope is that you will embrace your difference as a powerful expression of the diversity of God's creation. And whatever struggles you may experience trying to navigate a world that doesn't accommodate your differences is not a reflection of anything being wrong with you. It's just the ways that our societies are still growing in human consciousness and understanding. Many of us have no idea about the suffering that neurodiverse individuals go through trying to mask and fit in to a society that not only doesn't make space for their diverse expression, but in so many ways can be socially cruel to their differences that they suppress their gifts and uniqueness just to fit in. If you identify as a neurotypical, here's a thought for how each one of us can be a part of creating a world that better accommodates and celebrates the diversity of God's creation. Dr. Barry Prezant asked a panel of high-functioning autistic adults, what's the one thing that's made the difference in you being successful in your life and in the world? And in every case, the answer was one person. One person who saw their strengths, their light, and encouraged them to be themselves. And each one of us has the opportunity to be that one person for another. One last story to close. In Brooklyn, New York, there's a school for differently abled Jewish children called Chush. One evening at a fundraising dinner, the father of the son of one of the children arose and extolled the school and the dedicated staff and cried out, "We're taught that God is perfect and that all God does is done with perfection. But what about my son Shia? He's brilliant in so many ways, but is challenged in so many others. Where's the divine perfection in Shia?" And then he told a story. One Sunday afternoon, Shia and his father came to the yeshiva where Shia studies in the morning, and the yeshiva boys were playing baseball. "I want to play," Shia whispered to his father. His father was worried. He knew Shia was not athletic at all, and that he didn't even know how to hold a bat properly, alone hit a ball with it. And most of the boys, understandably, wouldn't want his son on their team. Nevertheless, he approached one of the boys, and he asked if Shia might join them. And the boy shrugged. "Well, we're losing by 6 runs, and we're already in the 8th inning. I guess it's okay if he joins our team and goes up to bat for us in the 9th. Shia and his father were both ecstatic. By the bottom of the 8th, Shia's team had managed to hit 3 runs, and by the bottom of the 9th, they scored again. When Shia's turn at bat came up, they had 2 outs, and the bases were loaded. Would they really let Shia go to bat now? And they did. The first pitch came in, Shia swung clumsily and missed. One of his teammates came up to Shia and helped him hold the bat. The pitcher took a few steps forward. He threw the ball softly, and the 2 batters together hit a slow grounder. The pitcher caught the ball, could have easily ended the whole game by throwing it to the first baseman. Instead, he threw it on a high arc to right field, way beyond the first baseman's reach. Shia, run to first, all the boys yelled. Never in his life had Shia ever had to run to first. Wide-eyed, startled, he scampered down the baseline, and by the time he reached first, the right fielder had the ball. He could have easily thrown it to the second baseman, who in turn would have tagged Shia out, but instead he threw it far over the third baseman's head. Everyone started yelling again, Shia, run to second, run to second. Shia ran to second base as the runners ahead of him deliriously circled the bases towards home. And when he got to second base, the other team's shortstop ran up to him, turned towards the third base, and shouted, Shia, run to third. And as he rounded third, the boys in both teams ran behind him screaming, Shia, run home! Shia, run home! And Shia ran home. No sooner had he stepped on home plate than all the boys from both the teams raised him high on the air and on their shoulders. He had just hit a grand slam and won the game for his team. That day, said the father, who now had tears rolling down his face, that day I learned about God's perfection. For when God brings a child like Shia into the world, he not only is bringing a perfect gift for all of us, now the perfection that God seeks from us is in how other people treat him. Shana Tova.